So when we're solving quadratics by factoring, that's when you're going to take and use the x in the box sometimes, or just factor out the GCF. So how can we tell if we need the box or not? If after you factor out your GCF, you have a 1 in front of your squared, or your a is 1, you no longer need the box. You will always need the x. So to do the x, you multiply the first and the last, so your a times your c gives you a negative 36x squared. And then you're trying to find which of those will multiply to give you negative 36, so will add to give you a 5x. So if we know it's negative, they need to be opposite sign. This is positive, so that means my larger sign needs to be positive. So when I think about numbers that can multiply to give me 36, 9 and 4 come to mind. And so 9x and negative 4x. So when I come to my factors, it's x minus 4, x plus 9 equals 0. And then on these, when we're solving by factoring, we not only stop at that step, you go down to where you make your table. So x minus 4, x plus 9. So x minus 4 equals 0. So x is equal to 4. X plus 9 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 9, because remember we do the opposite operation to move it across. And so my solution, we write them in order from least to greatest. The first one shows up as negative 9, and then 4. That's your answer. Okay, so in this one, we first have to get everything to the same side. So we need to subtract the 1 and add the 17x. That 17x needs to be in that second position because you have ax squared plus bx plus c. So when I do that, I end up with x squared plus 17x plus 60 is equal to 0. So that means I need to multiply to give me 60x squared, but yet add to be 17x. That means the signs need to be the same. So what can multiply to give me 60 that would add to give me 17? 12 and 5 would multiply to give me 60, and if I add those, I get 17. So it's x plus 12 and x plus 5 are my two factors. And so I'll go ahead and put that in a chart. And so I have x plus 12 as one of my factors, x plus 5 is the other factor. I set those two factors equal to 0. And so my two solutions are x equals a set of negative 12, comma, negative 5. Now let's go ahead and look at the next problem. Number 34, again, we need to start by getting everything to the same side. And so we get everything to the same side. We subtract the 2x squared, and we subtract the 22x. The 2x squared subtracts from the 3x squared. The negative 22x doesn't have anything to combine with, so it's going to be put in that spot in the middle. So 3 minus 2 is 1x squared minus 22x plus 112 equals 0. So 112x squared, where we multiply the a times your c term, needs to add together to give me negative 22x. That means both of them need to be negative. And so if I think of two things that can multiply to give me that 112, 8 and 14 multiply to give me that. So negative 8x, negative 14x. And so x minus 8 and x minus 14. And so far, because we haven't had anything as a a of more than 1, we haven't needed to use this box down here yet. So we now have our factors. So we have a column for each factor. And we need to move the -8 over to the right-hand side, and that makes it a +8. We move -14 over to the right-hand side, gives us x is equal to +14. And so my set is x equals 8, 14. So on this one, we still have to get the 42 and the x to the left-hand side before we can start working with it. So we add the x and subtract the 42. When we do that, we end up with 2x squared plus 8x minus 42 is equal to 0. With this, we have a GCF this time. Our GCF is a number that can divide into all 3 parts. So in this case, it's 2. So when I factor out the 2, that's like dividing everything by 2. So 2x squared divided by 2 gives me x squared. 8x divided by 2 gives me 4. 42 divided by 2 gives me a -21. So the product of my a times c goes over the top. So -21x squared. At the bottom, we're going to put that 4x. And so we're trying to find the numbers that will multiply to give me -21 that will add to give me 4x. So when I look at those numbers, the numbers that can do that are 7x and -3x, because they have to be opposite signs, and the larger one needs to be positive. So we still write down that 2, and then we have our x plus 7 and our x minus 3 as our other 2 factors. Now we go over to our chart. This time we have 3 factors to work with: the 2, the x plus 7, and the x minus 3. We're going to set each of those equal to 0, and then solve each of the equations that have an x in them. So 2 can't equal 0, so that one's gone. When we move our 7 to the right-hand side, it becomes a -7. We move our -3 to the right-hand side, it becomes a +3. And so my answer is x equals the set of -7, 3. And I didn't have to use this chart because our a, after we factored out that 2, was 1. So let's go ahead and look at number 36. And again, we don't have everything on the same side. So step 1 is to move the 5 over to the left-hand side by changing its sign. And so we have 12x squared plus 17x minus 5 is equal to 0. So when we multiply 12 times 5, we come up with a -60x squared. And so I want to figure out something that has a difference of 17x, and we have a positive 20x and a -3x, and that will give me the difference of 17. So when I go down to fill in my chart, the 12x squared goes here, the -5 goes here, and the 20x and the -3x could be interchanged with whichever spot you put them in. They can go either one of those 2 spots. So now let's factor out our column. 12 and 3 are both divisible by 3, and there's an x in both, so 3x. 20 and 5 are both divisible by 5, and the closest sign is positive, so it's a positive 5. So my first factor is 3x plus 5. So now let's do our rows. So 12 and 20 are both divisible by 4, and there's an x in both. Negative 3 and negative 5 are both divisible by 1 only, and the closest sign is negative, so it's a negative 1. So 4x minus 1, and then that's equal to 0. Now I'm going to set each of the factors equal to 0. In my chart, so I need to move the 5 over to the right hand side, so it gives me 3x is equal to negative 5. Divide both sides by 3. X is equal to a negative 5/3. Move the negative 1 to the right. So 4x is equal to a positive 1. Divide both sides by 4. X is equal to 1/4. So my solution is x equals the set negative 5/3, comma 1/4. So looking at number 37, it's again similar idea. We got to get everything moved from the right hand side to the left hand side. So we'll start with that. And we'll move the 20x over to the left, and the 4 over. It's going to change signs. There's nothing that can combine, and so when I rewrite it, I have 25x squared minus 20x plus 4 equals 0. So the product goes up at the top, 100x squared. The negative 20 comes down here. So what can multiply to give me 100 that would add to give me a negative 20? Well, the two factors that come to mind are negative 10x and negative 10x. And then move up from the original problem, 25x squared. And the 4 goes here. So the factor that is in common between the first column is a 5, and they both have an x. 10 and 4 are both divisible by 2. Closest sign is negative. So 5x minus 2. Now looking at that first row, 25 and negative 10, both divisible by 5. There's an x in both. Negative 10 and 4, both divisible by 2, and then a negative sign is closest. So these match, and so that means I put a squared up here. 0. So since you really just kind of have one factor here, when you make your chart, you just have the one factor to set equal to 0. So 5x minus 2 equals 0. First step is move that negative 2 to the right, so I'm making it a positive 2. So 5x equals 2 divided by 5. X is equal to 2/5. And so x is equal to the set 2/5, and there's nothing else in that set, so that's it. When we look at the next ones, they look a little bit different. So number 38, if I look here, I don't have a C term. And so the next thing I need to look for is there a GCF that I can factor out of all the terms?
And my GCF is just an x. So I'm going to divide each of these by x, and I'm going to write that x in the front. X squared divided by x is x. 5x divided by x is 5. And we're still equal to 0. Since we no longer have any powers, we don't need the x, and we don't need the box. So we're going to set our factors in our chart, and we're going to set them equal to 0. So we move that positive 5 to the right-hand side, and that becomes a negative 5. And that x equals 0, there's nothing else I can do to it. So my answer is the set negative 5, comma 0. So again, especially if you don't have a C term, look for that GCF and see if you can factor it out. Let's do this next one. This time I have a little bit of extra step I need to do. I need to move the negative 2x to join the 30. And so I have 8x squared plus 28x is equal to 0. So 8 and 28 share a factor of 4. X and squared and x share a factor of x. So I can factor out a 4x, leaving behind, when I divide this by 4x, that leaves me 2x. When I divide this by 4x, it leaves me 7. Make my chart. 4x and 2x plus 7 are my two factors. Set them equal to 0. So I divide both sides by 4. Well, anything times 0 divided by anything is 0. Move the 7 over. And so I have 2x is equal to negative 7. And so x is equal to negative 7 halves. And so my answer is x equals the set negative 7 halves, comma 0.